As a landlord, you may have had tenants who have been living in your rental property for a certain period of time, but now it's time to move on. But how do you go about letting them know that their lease will not be renewed? In this video, we'll explore the benefits of sending a lease non-renewal letter to your tenant, including how it can help protect you from future disputes. We'll also provide you with helpful tips on how to write a non-renewal letter and a free template you can download on DoorLoop. So let's get started. What is a lease non-renewal letter? A non-renewal of lease letter can be sent by either the landlord or the tenant. It's a written notice informing the other party that you do not wish to renew the current lease. This letter also contains information regarding the return of the security deposit, move-out instructions, the last rent payment of the existing lease, etc. Furthermore, a lease non-renewal letter is also known as a notice not to renew a lease, a notice or intent to vacate, or a non-renewal of lease letter, according to the customs of the local real estate market. This letter is sent to the other party before the lease expiration date. Typically, a lease non-renewal letter is delivered 60 days prior to the lease's expiration date. However, depending on the terms of the lease and the state's landlord-tenant laws where the property is located, the precise number of days prior to the end of a lease that a non-renewal letter must be issued can vary. If the letter isn't sent with sufficient notice, the landlord might be in a violation of state and local housing laws and could face possible penalties. Generally speaking, if the lease does not expressly call for the notice, a landlord will send a tenant a letter notifying them that their lease will not be renewed. Does a landlord need a reason for not renewing the lease? No, you don't. A landlord can have a reason for not renewing the lease at the end of the lease's term. However, there are a few exceptions, such as discrimination, retaliation, and local public housing authority. Therefore, if a landlord fails to renew a lease agreement for one of those reasons, they may be liable for fines and penalties or a potential lawsuit from the tenant. What are the most common reasons for a landlord not to renew the lease? Landlords may choose not to renew the tenant's lease for a variety of reasons, such as the tenant constantly has maintenance requests, often for small things such as a squeaking door or a scratch on the floor. The lessee constantly tries to take advantage of the landlord by making late rental payments or paying just before the end of the grace period. A tenant's overnight visitors eventually become secret subtenants, but the lessee won't acknowledge that people who aren't on the lease are living there. The tenant constantly causes damage to the property that extends beyond normal wear and tear, such as breaking windows or backing up into the garage door. If the landlord's decision not to renew the lease with the current tenants does not conflict with federal, state, or local housing rules, and they simply want to rent the property to someone else. The current property owner has decided to sell the house to an interested buyer. When do you need to send a notice of non-renewal? When it comes to fixed-term leases, if a minimum period of time is needed to submit an official notice of non-renewal a lease, it should be included in the lease agreement. Unless the contract specifies otherwise, failure to provide the notice by the deadline will result in the tenancy becoming month-to-month. A not renewing lease letter is highly advised, even if it's not necessary. This gives the tenant some time to look for new housing. The renter's reaction will also reveal if the tenant intends to cooperate if you need to take further legal action. How to send a lease non-renewal letter. The majority of lease agreements will outline the appropriate channels for correspondence between the landlord and tenant. However, the best way to deliver a notice is to send one that necessitates a signature confirmation to show that it was delivered. You can do this by sending the notice by certified mail or restricted certified mail, which only allows the renter to sign for the document. The delivery method and any other pertinent information should be noted on a copy of this notification that the landlord keeps on file. So what happens once the lease letter of non-renewal is sent? Once you've sent a non-renewal lease letter to your current tenant, one of two things can happen. They can become a holdover tenant, or the tenant acknowledges the notice and vacates the rental property. Let's discuss these in a little bit further detail. A holdover tenant. Landlords have the right to start the eviction process if a tenant refuses to leave the property. A good place to start when evicting a lingering tenant is the fact that you have records of communication informing the occupant of your decision to not renew the lease. Don't accept any rent payments if you want to carry on with the eviction process. If payment is accepted, your right to eviction can be waived, and the tenant might be regarded as holding a month-to-month lease. The tenant acknowledges the lease non-renewal letter and vacates the property. This is obviously the best case scenario. The tenant will typically acknowledge the notice and prepare to vacate in accordance with the move out and lease instructions. Based on these instructions, the property owner can get in touch with the leasee to wrap up the transaction. Generally, these move out instructions contain the following: returning the keys to the rental unit, cleaning the rental property, repairs relating to damages beyond normal wear and tear, returning the security deposit, and landlord inspection. If you're planning on renting out the unit again, you'll need to start planning and preparing for the new tenants. This process includes making repairs, screening prospective tenants, advertising, and staging the rental property. How to write a lease non-renewal letter. Your letter needs to include various information, including landlord's name and contact details, the landlord's signature, the date on which the letter is sent, the tenant's name and contact details, the rental property's address and unit number, the date on which the final rental payment is due, move-out instructions, the tenant's current lease requirements, the current lease's expiration date, a reference to the current lease agreement, the reason for non-renewal of lease, the tenant's acknowledgement, the deadline for the tenant's response, and the return deposit and security deposit amount. State laws on lease non-renewal notices. Often there is no provision in the lease agreement describing how to cancel a lease if it has expired and is on a month-to-month basis. A landlord may have a deadline for sending the notice based on state. Landlords must adhere to these deadlines to prevent further delays. A notice of non-renewal of lease should still be issued, even if your lease or state law doesn't specify a deadline. It's generally advised to give at least a 60-day notice. Click the link in the description below to see a breakdown of tenant laws state by state. Can a tenant decide not to renew the lease? In most real estate markets, there is a high demand from tenants for quality rental homes, but it's also possible that a tenant won't choose to renew a lease. A tenant might opt to not renew the lease, for instance, if they need more or less space, are relocating to a different city, or both. If a tenant decides not to renew a lease, you can do any of the following. Ask the tenant to sign a non-renewal letter. Ensure that the tenant is giving you sufficient notice of non-renewal. Ask the tenant to send you a non-renewal letter. So as you can see, a non-renewal of lease letter is a crucial document for landlords that don't want to renew an existing lease agreement for whichever reason. From the return of security deposits to move-out instructions, this written notice contains comprehensive details. Additionally, DoorLoop's property management software includes a feature that can automate the process of sending lease non-renewal letters, saving you time and hassle. With DoorLoop, you can streamline your rental management task and focus on growing your business. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos on property management, and we'll see you in the next one.